Hello, Tesha.
Hi, Jen. How are you?
I am good. I feel like I had a really quiet day today, but I go back and forth between being super productive around my house, and then
Hmm.
a day where I am focused more on like doing podcast work and working on my beauty counter business, and that's more like sitting here doing the work. And so I feel like I didn't do much today, but when I sit and think about it, it's like I actually did a lot, but I am beat. You had a day though.
I did. I had a day. Um, basically, um, we had our passports delivered today. So they were approved. Hooray!
Yay!
And the mail carrier, he handed me the package. He had to, it's a signature required type thing. They don't just leave the passports in your mailbox. And for whatever reason, when he spoke, it like triggered me to like look right at him and like look him in the eye, as opposed to like I was just really focused on the package. And for some reason I just had this like jolt and this like feeling, and I was just like, Jesus Christ, pardon my language, like I think it's my dad.
That
And like my
still sounds
biological
so weird.
father, who I have not seen in more than 30 years, and fact of the matter is wouldn't know if he was standing on my doorstep. And that just really sent me reeling. And I am going to share a long version of all of this and all of the emotions and all the feelings and stuff that went with this and where I'm at with it now, um, in an episode on Patreon, because it
We
was a day.
we literally
It was a day.
we just recorded our very first like impromptu, we have to record this Patreon episode. Um
Yes.
which is timely because Friday, so 2 days after this episode that you're listening to launches, um, we will be releasing our very first official Patreon episode, which is a conversation with Tisha and I, where
Mhm.
Tisha shares a story from her childhood. That
Yes.
is another doozy that is definitely worth a listen. So I highly recommend you head on over to Patreon and join so you can hear that, and you can hear the follow up to the potential postman dad situation. Um, because yeah, it's pretty crazy. And then we have an episode now, which is
Yeah.
Sneha,
Yes.
who
She was
Sneha
so inspiring.
she's so inspiring. I'm so excited to have you guys listen to this episode. She's in India. We had her on our list of someone to book for a while because figuring out time differences and times that worked for the three of us was challenging. But I'm so glad that we did.
Hmm.
She actually came to us through one of our early guests, and
Yes.
yeah, it's a great story, and it's funny like that, Tisha, you had a day that was kind of had you, I think, thinking about family and things like that,
Hmm.
and her episode revolves a lot around family as well. So it's all feels like it's all kind of like meshing together in a really, I don't know, fortuitous way. But I hope you enjoy the
Yeah.
episode. We hope you enjoy the episode. Join us on Patreon to hear a bit of Tisha's story, and make sure to share it with your friends. Hi, I'm Jen, and welcome back to Now What?
And I'm Tisha. Thank you so much for listening. Today, we're going to be joined by Sneha, who we've been wanting to record with for a while, but she is in India. So there's a bit of a time difference. So we're recording here at 10 a.m. What time is it where you are, Sneha?
About 8:45 p.m.
8:45 at night. Yeah. So big time difference. Anyways, thank you so much for joining us. Sneha is the founder of Mind Matters, and she actually has two podcasts. One is called Perspectives, and the other is called A Step Towards Health. Correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Awesome. So, and Perspectives is I think sort of similar to this, where you have different guests come on and tell their stories and talk about mental health, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. So, and I'm assuming obviously you got into that because you had your own story.
That is right. Firstly, thank you so much. I'm glad that we finally found a time that kind of
Yes.
worked for both of us. I really admire the kind of work that the two of you are doing, and I'm such a advocate for the concept of conversation in mental health because it's such a huge part of making a difference in that sphere and like really overcome that taboo and that stigma. And clearly, that's kind of the foundation of perspectives as well. So I really admire the work. I'm really glad that y'all are doing this, and thank you for having me.
Yes. Thank you
Yes.
for being here.
I did start Mind Matters with my own story. So I'm currently 23, and I am a final year law student, and I will be pursuing human rights law. So my goal in life is to be an international human rights lawyer. So my academically, I don't really have any understanding of psychology or mental health or anything in this field, but I had my own experiences, which kind of went back to the age of 16. So am the second child of two working parents, and I had an older brother who is 8 years older than me. And because my parents were both working, my brother and I spent a lot of time together. And especially because of this big age gap, along with being my brother, he was also kind of like a parental figure and a protector, and all of that wrapped into one. I was 16 years old when he passed away, and I still remember the night. It was, I don't know what the translation is for y'all in your high school. So it was 10th grade for me.
Yep.
And we have a graduation at 10th grade, and it was on my graduation day. Um, I remember that 10 o'clock in the morning was when we were supposed to leave for my campus for the graduation ceremony. And the night before, we had an aunt and uncle come down from our hometown in Kerala. I'm based in Bangalore, Karnataka, so they were staying with us. And I remember um, because they were a bit older, my brother cleared out his room and went to the guest room upstairs. And he was working that time. And he had an odd schedule because he was handling an American client. So he's usually back home around 2 a.m. post his shift. But that day, he came back around 10 p.m. and he complained of a stomachache. And we didn't really think much of it. We just figured maybe it's food poisoning or he ate something wrong, and figured he's just gonna sleep it off. And I remember we were all up till around 12, I think, downstairs talking. And after that, I was like, I'm gonna get some rest because graduation's tomorrow. And then I remember at 2 in the morning waking up to my mom screaming out my brother's name. I didn't think much of it. I just ran upstairs, and I went upstairs and I saw my brother was unconscious on the bed, and my cousin was trying to do CPR and like restart his heart. We've been calling the ambulance. It was taking a while, and then finally, our front door neighbors ran in. They helped out as well, and their car was already parked on the road. So they carried my 6'2" brother downstairs, got him into the car, and they rushed to the hospital. I stayed back with my mom, my dad, my cousin, and my neighbors went with my brother. And I remember just waiting and just waiting for the phone call. Or and I don't know. I had this. I was just hoping at least that when the phone rings, it was going to be him on the other line just saying, "Hi, I got you," because he was a nutcase of a person. He had the best personality, the best kind of vibe, the kind of energy that just was infectious. And I was really, really hoping it was like a cruel prank or just for him to call up and say that I passed out because I didn't eat. But the phone call that we got around 4:30 in the morning was not the same. Um, my dad called up my uncle and said that by the time they got to the hospital, he was already brain dead. And because of the protocol, um, like your legal protocols, when a person is brought brain dead to a hospital, they have to conduct a postmortem. And when they conducted the postmortem is what we found out that my brother passed of a heart attack. And it was kind of insane to accept because he was 24 years old. He
Yeah.
was fit. But further looking into it is kind of what we found out. It was something called deep vein thrombosis. Basically, a blood clot in his ankle traveled up to his heart and caused that attack. And till date, I'll be honest, we still don't know what caused that blood clot. A cousin of mine is married to a cardiologist, and he told us that something massive must have happened in the 6 months prior for him to have sustained such a blood clot that would have caused that. And I cannot, for the love of God, remember if anything happened because I don't remember him even limping once in those 6 months. And I've played back time after time. And I don't know, that kind of began my journey with mental health because I don't know how much you're aware of my culture in India or anything like that, but we're not really a society that talks about these kind of things. We didn't talk about grief or anything like that. And losing Sanjay wasn't the first time I had experienced that. I had lost two of my grandparents before. But in my understanding, like what I was always told is a person grows old, they've lived their entire life, and then they pass. So that loss never affected me as much. In my head, I just accepted, okay, they're 90 years old, they've lived their entire life. After a certain point, a person does pass. But that was my entire understanding of death. And then I lost my brother when he was 24 years old, and that kind of just shook everything. Like nothing about that made sense in no form, no size, shape. But
it doesn't.
And that kind of started. Yeah, I'm still trying to process it, to be honest. But that kind of began how grief started affecting me. And again, no one talked about it. I still haven't really had a conversation about it within the family as well, because I don't know, people just didn't talk about it. So that grief, it really got messy. I kind of, I became very isolated and reclusive. I didn't talk for a good couple of months to people. At the most, I would just respond to like, "Yeah, I'm alive." That's it. That's the extent of what my conversation used to be. But I didn't feel like talking about anything, and I had massive exams a month after this, which was instrumental into deciding which school I'd get to. And it had always been like a very isolated space. Then it got bad and it kept getting bad. And about 3 years into my journey of grief, I finally decided to get help because I reached a really messy point and I took steps that now when I look back to it, I realized that it was that intense for me. And I had considered suicide because in my mind, the only person that mattered was my brother to me. And being in a place without him just didn't make sense. And all I wanted to do was, well, get back to him. And I was in this weird state and I realized I really needed help. And I took steps. I did attempt. Um, it didn't work clearly because I'm still here. But after that is when I realized that I needed to talk to someone about it. I needed help. I have a few.
Like what, because so you don't speak of grief, and death. It just happens when
No,
you're
we don't.
old. So like what happens after something like how is something like a suicide attempt treated?
My family did not know about it until 4 years later.
Okay.
It was actually a friend of mine from university
Okay.
who realized that this happened, and they kind of. I do owe a lot to a couple of friends of mine in my circle because they're the only reasons why I did actually get help when I had to, and I truly believe I'm here because of that.
Right.
And when I decided to get help, I decided that I don't have a lot of people in the family that I feel like I can trust, which is something like it's developed now, but at that point in time it wasn't. But I did have one cousin that I was very close to, and I just broke down and I told her that all of this happened and I don't know what to do, and I decided to get help. But I couldn't tell people in my family. I couldn't tell my parents that I went to therapy. I went to therapy for 3 years before my parents found out. It was like any extra cash that I had, I would just spend it on this. I freelance as a writer. Any money I made, so I would go into therapy. Sometimes my cousins would help out, but I did without having to tell anyone. Every single time I went out, I would tell my parents that I'm with a friend, and my friends would cover for me. But that's kind of the state of which it was. And
Was it
it
because
took
there was
a long
shame?
time.
Was there like a stigma around it, a shame of it, or you
Oh yeah,
just didn't feel
absolutely.
comfortable? Okay.
Honestly, I think it was a bit of both because I think for a long time I felt like a massive responsibility on my head that I can't bring up my brother's loss with my family, especially with my parents, because in my head I felt like they're also grieving and I don't
Mm-hmm.
want them to worry about me. But after a certain point, holding it on my own was too much and I broke. And I was really hoping that someone would have seen it, but I needed that support. But I, at the same time, even though I was like at the age of like 16, 17, I felt like it was my job to make sure that they were okay. Because it's a huge event and it clearly affected
Mhm.
all of us. But I don't
Yeah,
know. I think
because they're grieving
in
too.
and they were grieving their firstborn, so I can't even imagine what that would be like. But in our society, we've always had this kind of space where there is a lot of pressure on children to take care of their parents.
Yeah.
Like it
Mhm.
is kind of ingrained into us from a very young age. And I think that is just something that always stays with any decision I make. Even now, when I'm trying to decide things about education and like pursuing a master's degree, I think back to like, will my parents be okay if I move to a different country? Are they going to be able to manage? Is there something I need to do? Is it okay if I want to do this? So it's kind of it's become almost a reflex. But I finally did get help, and even getting help was such a rocky road because I didn't know what to expect, where to go, what to understand, what anything about it. So it was a big trial and error kind of thing. But then I finally did find a therapist that I it sat right with me. So by the time I went to help was like 3, 4 years in. So I was diagnosed with severe depression, anxiety, complicated grief, and PTSD. Because even 4 years after the incident, I was still physically affected by exactly what happened. So even
Mhm.
now, I still struggle with sleep. And the reason that I have such a odd sleep schedule and like why I'm quite nocturnal is because of during the time of like 2 to 4 a.m. It's very difficult for me to be asleep. Because when I try also, I tend to wake up in flashbacks like that night is repeating. So I just kind of stopped sleeping. And since I was already awake, I needed to keep busy. So I just started working through the night. That's kind of just how my um, routine developed and has kind of just stuck now. But when I finally got to a place where I was a lot more comfortable with everything that happened, which is only last year in 2020, when I actually felt like I'm in a better space. Because when I found the therapist that worked for me, I used to have very physical reactions to in my episodes of like PTSD. Like I would end up punching a wall quite often, and I have bruised and torn muscles in my fingers so much. It's kind of surprising how they're still functioning even now. But I had done the whole journaling and all of it, but it wasn't enough for me. I needed a more physical outlet. And my therapist was the one that suggested why don't I try something like combat sports. So I got into that. So I was in mixed martial arts for about 3 years. But that was almost a mistake on my part that I got so heavily dependent on only one coping mechanism that was working for me because I ended up getting injured and I lost my mobility for a year. I had to relearn how to walk. Like I had a massive surgery in my knee and I had to basically learn how to walk again. And in that one year, when I was bedridden for almost 8 months, it was one of the worst times for my mental health because everything that I had avoided, everything that I used a physical outlet to get out of my system, it all built up and it came back crashing. And that's when I
Mhm.
really realized that you need more than one coping mechanism. You cannot be heavily dependent on just one because when you lose that, the spiral is terrifying. And
Right.
that's exactly what happened with me.
Yeah,
And
that's really
over the
wise
year,
advice, I think.
losing my mobility was one of the hardest things ever, because I am the kind of person that needs to be busy, and it's almost a trauma response from everything that's happened.
Yeah.
That I need to stay busy to keep my mind occupied. So even in law school, I'm part of like 15 different clubs. I'm in a lot of activities. I conduct a lot of things. So when I was like forced to a standstill, even a couple of years earlier, I had a ligament tear in my ankle. They had a cast put on, and that didn't stop me from moving. I broke plaster of Paris because I was moving so much, even with the cast.
Right. Well, I
And
think a loss of mobility can lead to, really negative mental health ramifications without
oh,
all of the
Anyways,
other
yeah.
other things, right? And so if that was like your main vehicle for coping with everything, then I mean, it feels like just a given. Did the loss of mobility come as a result of the combat sports, or was it something completely separate? Like, did
no,
your
that's
coping
the
lead to
interesting
it?
thing. No,
Because
um,
can you? I mean,
I
because they could, right?
it's a funny thing that we talk about even now. I was in combat sports for almost 2 to 3 years, and I did not sustain an injury at all. To that magnitude, like I've had bruises and things like that, but I actually that injury was during a badminton tournament for my university, and that I played badminton for almost 6 7 years, like at a competitive level, but never had any injury. But 7 years down the line, I lost the knee snapped, and it's still such a funny thing, like not a funny thing, just a weird thing for me to
Okay.
think about, like combat sports for 3 years, nothing,
No
and then
injuries, badminton.
Badminton.
that's what happened. But after I,
That's life.
but I did it again. I learned how to walk again, and it's just I am so grateful to modern medicine for that, and the doctors that helped me out. But after the whole leg thing happened, and there were a lot of other incidents that kind of started like a whole new journey for me. I think it was kind of it's very weird to say it, but maybe almost poetic, but almost like a rebirth. Um, I had a chance to go to Mumbai last year in 2020 for like an internship, and I have a very deep connection with water, which sucks because I live in a landlocked city. But Mumbai is a coastal city, and I got lucky that one of their most famous beaches was a 5 minute walk from my office. So day one, we finished our internship. We clocked out around 8:30. A friend of mine and we're like, let's just go. So we walked down to the beach, and I spent about an hour with my feet in the water, just looking at the moon. And there was something so magical and spiritual about that space. I just felt very connected and at peace. And even over all my years of whether I believed in my faith in my religion or not, or whatever it is, I had never felt a peace like that. That kind of started a lot of things for me. And then last year, I started Mind Matters. I finally came to a head. I wanted to do something in this space where I really want to talk about mental health, and but I had never been in a headspace to follow through until last year. And I started with Mind Matters, and my idea was to break it down into three things. One was the ultimate goal was to talk about how it's okay to get help and to sort of tackle the accessibility of help. But and the whole stigma around it, I wanted it smashed because that stigma is the main reason why my journey was so painful and it was so difficult to deal
Absolutely.
with.
Yeah.
So what I did with Mind Matters was like I just thought to myself, if I could break down the stigma in one swing, it would be awesome. It would be awesome if we could just get rid of it in one go. But unfortunately, we couldn't. So I had to take a step by step approach. So step one was just me telling a little bit about my story. And step two was to bring people to talk about their stories as well. And that's how perspectives came into being. So I've been so lucky to have conversations with people from across the world where they talk so openly about their space, their journeys on that
Mhm.
space. And I've also learned so much. I have built a community through that whole project that now I'm so grateful to be able to lean on even now. And after I had that idea of like getting the conversation out, a lot of people reached out saying that I want to get help, but I don't know where. I want to get help, but I don't know what to expect. And I had the same questions when I wanted to get help as well. So that's kind of how the idea for a step towards help came into existence. So I started reaching out to therapists from across the world, saying that would you be open to having a conversation where we just talk about what therapy is, the misconceptions of it, how to get help, and what to expect. And at that point in time, we also wanted to somehow tackle a little bit about people's questions. So people sent in questions. We had a form open for months, and we had almost 200 questions sent in. And people wanted answers, things that they wanted to ask therapists. Either they didn't have the resources to, access to, or they just weren't feeling comfortable enough. So we did that on the podcast. So a step towards help, I've worked with almost 20 to 40 therapists. Every single one has psychoanalyzed me up until now. Uh, I don't even, I've been called out for every aspect of my existence in this whole process, but worth it. But yeah, so after a step towards help started coming out, I had an idea of what I wanted to do next. But that was something that I needed funding for. And I'm a 23-year-old college student, somehow trying to get through law school. So I didn't have the funds to go ahead with the next phase of my project. So I just figured that I would take a pause and see exactly how I would do it. I always knew that when I started working as well, a percentage of my funds would always move into this project. That was something I'd already accepted. As corny as it sounds, I've always been the kind of person that wants to help people. I think that's why even my decision in to pursue law was to pursue human rights law. And I work with a nonprofit because rights, to make sure that people get their rights, is something I'm very passionate about. And somehow even Mind Matters is coming on that path as well, and I'm very lucky. This year, back in September, I actually I was awarded a grant by an organization called Utopia. They are a network of youth change makers, and they thought that the change that I'm making is sustainable change that needed more support. And I was really lucky that they awarded me this grant, and that grant has now opened up um, the next phase of our project. It's funding our project, which is the wellness support program. So the wellness support program are these 12 session programs where we're hoping to equip people with tools to help cope with their mental health, which includes group therapy sessions, movement sessions, breath work, workshops to understand what these different concepts are, and also community building. I've seen a lot of these community-based programs work, but I've also seen that the accessibility of it is a reason a lot of people don't take it, because it's not a very cheap concept as well. It's quite expensive. And when you factor in the currency exchange rate, for some people, it's nearly an impossibility. So I wanted to create a program like that. And with the funds that we have now, we've actually begun this phase of our project where you can take part in these community building programs completely free of cost. So this program is now live on Mind Matters. It's called Wellness Support Program. And it's available to anyone and everyone who wants it completely free of cost.
That's amazing.
I am so inspired by you right now. I'm just like listening to you talk. I was like, Jen and I need to talk later. Like, it's amazing.
And you're 23.
Yeah.
That's inspiring. That's truly like, I hope you realize what an amazing feat that is. You know, we've talked a lot here with different people about the importance in finding meaning in or making meaning in your trauma and grief and all of that, and you have like taken that to, I think, a step beyond what I think anybody really thinks they can do, you know. And I have said many times that I don't believe in silver linings in any way. Like, there's no way you can make any trauma that's happened to you okay, but you have found a way to move forward and turn it into something that really helps people, and that's really amazing.
Thank you. I really appreciate you saying that.
I think you know, like a lot of us, our stories have so many, they're multi-layered, right? Like you have this kind of piece with your brother passing away and all of that, and then as well like losing your mobility and really losing your coping mechanisms and having to kind of rebuild again. And it was very poetic that you kind of described that as like your rebirth. I also think you made a really important point about, finding multiple coping mechanisms, because I do think you are not the only person who found one coping mechanism and went all in.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that's very common when people are struggling, that if they find one thing that makes them feel better, that they pour all of their energy into that. And you're right, then something like a pandemic happens and you can't go to the gym, for example, or you're injured or whatever, something happens and you aren't able to access your one coping mechanism, and now you're in trouble. So I think it is important when we're talking about mental health that we like start building like a toolbox where we have multiple ways.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That we can
and
learn to
the fact
cope.
of the matter is that like what works now might not work a year from now, regardless of access to it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like
Totally.
and it could be something as simple as like, having children and not being able to leave your house as much as you could before, or not being able to be on your own, and having to figure out a different way to kind of cope with what you're dealing with. And it also like just it has me think of just like therapy in general. Like people assume because you're in therapy, like you're good, you're covered, and it's like there's so much that's not going to fix you. Therapy alone is not going to fix you. It helps guide you there and whatever, but it's like it's not going to make your day to day okay all the time.
That's
Right.
kind of what the idea behind the wellness support program was as well. That I did not just go all in on just having group therapy sessions or just therapy sessions.
Yeah.
We wanted to build like give options of different things. So the program we've curated, we've tried our best to sort of like understand different perspectives to it. Like so, there's the session of the movement. It's called Understanding Our Body.
Yeah.
So the first program is specifically targeting anxiety and stress because of what the current situation of the world is.
Mm-hmm.
Like especially with COVID, I think everyone's anxiety has been off the charts. So we're really focusing on that. And this particular yoga instructor, Yamini, she's a dear friend of mine as well. She has a very specific practice that shows how the body and the mind is so connected, and what kind of practice will help calm the body when you're in that kind of space, and calm the mind with that kind of movement. So we have those kind of sessions. We breath work and meditation is something I picked up over the past year. And again, that was really difficult for me to sort of incorporate into my routine, because I'm sure you'd understand, like with PTSD, you don't really want to stay still, and you don't want to go alone with your thoughts. Because I get stuck in when I get stuck in that replay, I get stuck in that my episodes are not fun. They're never fun. And like the kind of the breaking out of that episode, it's an entire process on its own. It's just not a very safe space for me to be in. And so I never used to get into meditation because it was too difficult. But through this project, I met a friend who is a breathwork facilitator, conducts meditation workshops herself, and she got on call with me and used to do it with me every day. And we did that as a practice for a while. And I eventually got it into my routine. And I think another coping mechanism that I really love to lean on is community as a whole. Like, I just think community itself can be a coping mechanism, because I have definitely found a community through MindMatters. And it's kind of a weird full circle moment, because I tried to create what I never had, and somehow I found it myself.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love how you focus on all different modalities, and because different things work for different people, and it's easy like how you wrote off meditation for yourself, but then came around to it through, a friend or through exposure, and um, it's kind of like how everyone's like, when you're stressed, oh, do yoga. I can't tell you, like, I love to practice yoga, but so many people I know don't. And we actually had someone on the show who was like going to yoga and faking it and was like acting like it was helping her, but inside was like, that was stupid. And but
Yeah.
because she didn't say anything, and like we actually went to the same class, I'm like, we're going to the worst class, by the way, for what you needed. Like, that was not where you should have been going for yoga. But by having those conversations and exposing people to stuff instead of in a way of just like a throwaway, like, oh, go to yoga. Like actually giving people the space to learn how it can help, instead of, this like new agey hippie dippy thing that people just say, like, do yoga, do meditate, like it's so much more than that. And you're giving people the access to kind of figure it out, and again, that it's at no cost to them, because that's a huge thing too. It's like, I don't have the money to pay some meditation teacher when I don't think I want to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I personally dealt with the whole accessibility of and affordability of it. Like, even though I'm okay, like I can manage my stuff, but as a college student, putting every spare amount money that I had into it was quite an sort of, it was a lot of getting used to, because there were a lot of other
Yeah.
expenses that I had to sort of cut back on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think accessibility is huge.
And all this was because I couldn't ask my parents. Like, the funds was only because I couldn't ask.
Well, when you mix the idea that it's hard to access financially with the fact that you're not comfortable speaking about it, and like, let's make no mistake, like, it sounds like there might be more of a stigma, like, culturally where you are than there is here, but it's still not, widely accepted. I am dealing personally with deep traumatic grief, and people are as uncomfortable as fuck dealing with that. They don't know
Oh
what
yeah,
to
for
do.
sure.
They don't know what to do with me.
I think there's also this element that we probably do see here, I think culturally, like there is a lot of stigma around it, but also I think it's very hard for young people to feel comfortable talking to their parents or telling their parents that they want therapy, which, your brother was 16 when he died. Sorry, you were 16 when your brother died, and
yeah, he was 24.
living under your parents' roof. And a lot of teenagers don't want to talk to their parents about these issues and don't have the means also to just pay for it on their own.
Well, when you're 16, your parents don't understand anything. Let's be real.
Yeah.
They don't. Even if they do,
they do, but you don't think they do.
Right. Even if they do, they don't in your mind.
Right.
At least not for me. That's how it was.
And so I do think like the age and those child parent dynamics also is probably playing into that.
And quite honestly, in my situation specific, I wasn't really that close to my parents regardless.
Right.
Like, I was so much closer to Sanjay, and he was almost like a parental figure for me. So that dynamic in itself also made it so much more complicated.
Yes, because you lost a sibling, but really you lost a parent.
You lost that one person you confide in. And honestly, that's not always going to be a parent. Regardless of the situation, it's not always going to be a parent, right?
Like your biological parent.
Yeah.
Another really interesting thing about grief that I've also come to sort of understand over my journey is like this misconception about it, about how it's a linear journey. I don't know if either of y'all have ever sort of had experience with it, because I know for a while I did as well. Because I was under this impression, like there is the concept like stages of grief. Okay, you go through this stage, you go through this, and then like it was always sort of portrayed in this way to me, like, okay, once you're done with this stage, you're never going back. Okay, you've reached acceptance. Okay, you are all right with everything that's happened. But I have had that I've had my accepted stage, but then I have also been in denial since then also. And I think just the idea of the fact that it is anything but a linear journey was accepting that was a much more bigger step towards my probably coping journey as opposed to just accepting his death, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's
Mhm.
it's a journey that doesn't end. Your grief is with you for the rest of your life. And until somebody has lived through that or with that or had to carry that, they don't understand that. And because the overwhelming theory or image or whatever that we're provided with is the stages of grief, and stages are linear, and stages have a
Mhm.
beginning and an end, and there is nothing about grief that has that except for the beginning.
Mhm.
I think we spoke with a pair of women. They're based here in Canada, and they're called Being Here Human, and they do grief literacy work. And I think you would really dig their program and what they do.
Yeah, you should check out their website.
Okay, I will.
But I just going back to like that whole linear thing, I think it's not just with grief, it's from with any type of, I think, healing, maybe even physical, but like certainly with mental health, if you're trying to overcome anxiety, you're trying to overcome depression or trauma or whatever, we definitely have this idea that it gets better every single day. And then people, maybe will have some days where they feel good and then not feel good. And I think that can be really hard because we have this perception that like healing is linear. And then when people have these hard days, they think something's wrong with them specifically because, like, oh, what happened? Like, I was healing and now I'm not. Something must be wrong with me. When in fact, that is just part of the process. Like, when you're grieving, you might have days where you feel good and then not feel good.
Yeah, I've had days where I've actually thought that I've done the whole grief journey wrong. Like I've done the whole process
Right.
wrong.
Like somehow
Like
you could
as
make
though there was a right or wrong
Yeah.
process to it. Yeah, somehow I have grieved the person wrong because that's why I keep going back to stages that I've completed. And because my understanding has always been like stages of grief means that okay, if you get through this, you're not going back
right.
to that. Get through this, you're not going back to that. So, but when I went back to it, like I think that was also a point where I spiraled. Like, okay, I did it wrong.
I think that, your perspectives podcast and our podcast, and we've met other people who have similar podcasts where people are just sharing their story and trying to break down that stigma. And I think there's room for all of us to be doing that. And I think the more of us that are doing that, the better, because it is like people aren't talking about this stuff and people feel alone, and they don't know that other people are having similar struggles, or that it's okay to seek help. And the more of us who are out there just kind of doing that work and trying to spread the word, I think the better, right?
I mean, that's the storytelling perspective, like the storytelling approach is so powerful because of that. Because I've always noticed that when we share our stories, like whoever shares their stories, when people hear them, even if you don't relate to the entire experience or you don't have the same kind of journey with the entirety of the story, even if you can relate to a bit of it, like a small percentage of it, it validates their experiences and their feelings,
Yes.
and they feel less alone, and that can be life saving, is what I've seen.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I absolutely agree. So that's why we're doing this, right?
Yeah, it's like why we're all doing it, I think.
Yeah,
Hell yeah.
absolutely. And I think everybody that we've met who's doing something similar has come to this from making meaning from their own experiences, which really is, it is part of the process, is learning to kind of, whatever that might look like for you. Not everybody has to become like an advocate or whatever, or do anything grandiose, but finding a way to make meaning in their own way, I think, is really helpful for people who have experienced grief or trauma.
Absolutely.
So,
100%.
yeah. So that's what we got to do.
So how can people find you? Like find Mind Matters? Is everything like on a website somewhere? Because
Yeah, actually, this year, on back in September, on my birthday, actually, we went live with our new website, and it's called mindmattersinitiative.com. My favorite part of that website is the About the Team page, because I made the decision to name the team behind Mind Matters as me and my brother, because there is no way this project would exist had it not been for him. And this project has done a lot for me, and it's becoming something for people as well. But I think something that's very special about it is it's almost like an homage to him and an extension of him. So as long as I can keep Mind Matters alive, I feel like I'm almost keeping a part of him as well. And if people went to that part of the website, you'd actually get a chance to meet my brother. So what I did was is I wanted people to know who he was, but from his community and not just me. So I reached out to a lot of his friends, and his friends sent in videos talking about him.
amazing.
And we have like there's like a video montage of some pictures and things that he used to do, people talking about him. And my brother was a musician. I actually used one of his tracks that I still have on the video montage just because I wanted to share a little bit more
Yay.
about him.
That's so
That's
amazing.
awesome.
That's really
It's really
cool.
beautiful.
Yeah. I love that.
Thank you. But yeah, so you can find the website as mindmattersinitiative.com. And on Instagram, it's mindmatters_ the podcast and sneha.ksd.
Amazing. Thank you so
That's
much.
so great. Thank you so much.
We'll put all of that, like we'll add it into the show notes so anybody who wants to look it up can find that. And we'll make sure that we're tagging you and whatever when we release
Awesome.
your episode so people can
absolutely
find you
Thank
that way too.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. And I know it was a lot of work to overcome time differences, but I'm really glad that we did.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for giving me
Thank
space.
you. Thanks for listening to Now What. If you've enjoyed this episode, leave us a review. Your ratings and reviews help more people like you find our podcast.
Don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with someone you think would love it. Until next time, remember, your hard times are the chance to write another chapter.